Hello and welcome to the Mobalytics patch 11.16 tier list. Once again, I'm Dan Harrison, and just a reminder that not too long ago we had some big changes to our tier list. We added an extra tier to better spread out the champions in our list, and we've updated the tier list page on our site. Tier list videos didn't change too much as we still only focus on champs from S, A and B, but you can head on over to Mobalytics GG to see the full list including C and D tiers. They're featured in a table at the bottom of the page. Now let's jump straight in. In the top lane, in the God tier, we have Tahm, Dr. Mundo and Garen. And the S tier, we have Camille, Fiora, Kled, Malphite, Nasus, Ornn, Sett, Shen, Urgot, Wukong and Yorick. Top lane hasn't seen a drastic amount of changes. Tahm got toned down a tad with his passive damage and Q healing, but he's been such an unstoppable force in the top lane that this is unlikely to drastically change things, and he's still holding on to his S tier spot. Gnar has steadily lost relevance in the meta on the back of his nerfs, and honestly Irelia is such a good matchup into him that her strength has really made things even more difficult. Vladimir got some nice buffs to his passive ratio, which just essentially gives him more HP and AP in a game. He's still not in an ideal spot, but in these lane matchups he scales up really well. Alawi is benefiting a decent amount from a movement speed buff. It seemed minor, but when you're a champion without mobility, it can make a big difference. Kennen is a rising star, has been seeing a lot of playing competitive. The buffs to his Q damage were nice, but ultimately he's just functioning well as he can hold his own in lane, and is so effective in team fights, particularly into melee heavy compositions. If Kennen ever does snowball, it feels so difficult to win a game against him. Finally, Quinn has been looking solid. She can deal with a lot of melee champs who are popular top lane, and she's a strong side laner and duelist who can even function as an extra carry in team fights. On to our highlight picks. First up is Wukong. He's a solid laner, and as early as level 1 he can look to take decent trades around his E, and this only gets more effective at level 3 and 6. His all-in pressure is pretty massive once his ult is available, and as a result he can look for solo kills. Some players have even been taking Ignite instead of Flash in order to increase his threat, although it does make your team fighting weaker and puts you as a more vulnerable target for ganks. In teamfights, you're a massive backline threat, and the disruption and damage you can put out means you can easily solo carry, especially if you're against a strong and mobile carry you can look to target. Flanking as Wukong is incredibly effective, especially if the enemy team has a support like Thresh, who can usually effectively peel you away. Ornn is a brick wall in the top lane, hard to punish and dive, and capable of holding his own into most melee matchups while scaling into a late game monster. You spike pretty hard when you get your ornament at level 13 with the extra free stats, but even before that point you're super relevant with the CC you lay down. Ornn is best picked into a mobile champions on the enemy team, as they really struggle to avoid your ultimate without having flash available, and your team can easily follow up when they engage. Ornn also generates a lot of value from his ornaments, with each being worth around 1000 golden stats. For your entire team that ends up being a really significant amount. Anathema's Chains is also a great item in helping you retain your bulkiness later in the game. When AD carries have armor pen and fortified items, this can limit their ability to just shred through you and keep you relevant as a frontliner. Mordekaiser is doing really well at lower ranks. He does solid and extended trades thanks to his passive and Q being so good in 1v1s. His ultimate is a great tool for turning duels into his favour, as the huge amount of stats he takes makes it really hard for opponents to match up into him unless they're fed, and if they are fed, you're stealing more stats from them. In teamfights, he can ult a high priority carry and stall them out, he can ult a support to prevent them peeling, or another effective tactic is ulting their engage option. Against things like Diana, Hecarim and Ornn, if he ults them so that they can't offer the AoE CC and damage onto his teammates, and if he's strong enough to stall them out, then his team ends up in a really good spot. He's also amazing at setting up for neutral objectives, as if he ults the enemy jungler you can deny them from being able to smite. Onto jungle. In the God tier we have Nocturne, Trundle and Vi, and the S tier we have Amumu, Fiddlesticks, Master Yi, Rammus, Shaco, Viego, Volibear, Warwick and Zac. For jungle, we've seen Xin Zhao move down from his God tier spot thanks to losing 3 base AD. Now this doesn't sound like much, but it does hurt his clear speed and trims a fair amount of damage over the course of the early game. Diana's had a clear speed toned down with a nerf to her passive's effect on monsters. She's still a fast clearer and still a solid pick, but this definitely hurts, especially when ideal gameplay for her is farming to 6 as quickly and smoothly as possible. Kha'Zix is still a really solid champion at snowballing games when he gets ahead, but he struggles to have as much early impact, and in terms of contesting Scuttle, he's not the best, and champs like Trundle can just beat him up at close range. He's just a bit too reliant on his level 6 to get rolling, has been bumped down slightly. Shaco actually got hit far harder than we expected last patch with a bug fix that meant you could spot him stealthing in the fog of war, but this has now been reverted, and although obviously he was struggling on last patch, we expect him to be back to his usual ways, so haven't moved him down. Vi has been rising in popularity and finding solid success. Divine Sundra is a great one-item spike which syncs well with the kit, while giving her both damage and bulkiness. Vi is a solid ganker, being able to get over walls to find new approach angles and also able to close gaps and deal solid damage. At 6, her ult allows her to seek out high priority targets and shut them out of the fight. When behind, it will hold them in place for a team to follow up. When Vi is ahead, she can easily solo out a target on the back of her ult and follow up damage. The one thing to be cautious about is missing her Q in the early game makes it very difficult to win duels, so be ready for opponents to flash it or try and dodge, and be wary about overcommitting. Warwick is a really good low elo stomper. He's great at getting on top of targets and sticking to them with the power of his Q and W, and his E makes him a fantastic duelist, not only reducing damage, but the fear gives him time to dish out his high sustained damage and heal himself up. A lot of melee champions struggle against Warwick in early duels, as once he hits 6, he's incredibly difficult to handle if there isn't a second champion who can CC him off his ult target. Warwick works well with aggressive laners, as if they're trading frequently and getting targets low, he can use his W to gank effectively with the free movement speed he gets. Warwick can fall off in the later stages, and particularly if he's behind, but should you snowball then he feels almost immortal. Shyvana got some solid buffs to her QCD, which has made her early clear a fair bit faster. Shyvana's biggest issue, she's pretty weak without her ultimate, so 1 to 5 she's pretty focused on farming and not really interacting too much with the enemy jungler or with her laners unless there is a really easy opportunity. As she gets to level 6 then she becomes a bit of a monster. With her ult she can deal a ton of damage with her empowered E, on squishy targets she'll chunk them out, and if she can hit several with the same projectile then it's easily enough to dictate a teamfight skirmish. Once her ult is down, you can quickly stack it back up by clearing through some jungle camps, and after one item you're able to very quickly clear the jungle and build up a substantial CS lead. Onto mid lane, in the god tier we have Graves, Malzahar and Annie, and the S tier we have Ahri, Anivia, Diana, Aurelia, Kayle, Lux, Set, Talon, Vel'Koz, Yasuo and Ziggs. Talon is a pick who's emerged in the mid lane and been having a solid impact. His roam potential really allows him to take over games, and a big factor in his success has been a transition to Goredrinker as a mythic for a more bulky build while still doing a ton of damage. Vel'Koz has been performing really well, he's capable of shredding close-knit teamfights, but a big factor is whether or not you can position safely and carefully, and he's also tricky to play as landing your skill shots effectively is pivotal to piloting him well. That being said, at gold elo he's been performing really solidly in the right hands, and in the right scenarios is a good pickup. Sylas has been struggling a fair bit since the nerfs to his W, his sustain being cut means he just doesn't hold up as well into trickier matchups, and doesn't quite have the same survivability late game either. Katarina has been struggling, and I think a big factor is a lot of champs give it issue in close range. So many bulky bruises with Goredrinker can shut it down or are difficult to find resets from. She is still very potent in the right hands however. Graves got a buff to his base AD, and this definitely helped, but mostly the impact of this was increasing his play rate as people tried him and realized he was really potent in solo lanes. He's able to easily shove them with a combination of his Q and autos, and when it comes to dueling and skirmishing, he's very effective with his mobility, damage, and critically his smokescreen being great tools. His smokescreen is really hard to play around. Throwing it down on a target in a 2v2 or 3v3 fight can essentially take away one of the opponents until they can move out of it. Graves' current build involves going Eclipse into Collector, the lethality gives him a massive amount of burst, and the early sustain helps him deal with trickier lanes to outrange him. Graves' short range can be problematic in some scenarios in the late game, but his damage output keeps him relevant as long as he can get into range. His ult is also a massive spike for him, increasing his all-in damage and allowing him to provide follow-up damage on engages from a distance. Malzahar's bounced back really well from the nerfs he got a few patches ago. He's great at finding priority once he has the mana pool to back himself up, and can easily pushing waves and frustrate his opponents. His passive shield and ult make him a very hard target to engage onto, and he works really well in the meta as he can shut down a lot of the strong skirmishers, champions like Aurelia or Gwen, who will struggle to dive in and have an impact if Malzahar is about, and that can be enough to allow his backline to flourish. QSS definitely counters him a fair bit, but just forcing the enemy team to invest in them can have a ton of value as it's essentially a tax that allows your team to pull ahead in their builds, and unless everyone on the enemy team has built one, there's still going to be a target who you can look to use it on. Set has been really popping off in the mid lane. He can hold his own pretty well even against trickier lanes, a lot of harass, simply because Doran's shield combined with his built-in sustain and second wind means he can shake off most damage that an opponent throws at him. He constantly threatens the enemy mid as if they step too close to him, he can break their face with a stun and threaten an all-in or at least chunk them out. Being in mid lane means he can easily move around the map, and he's a solid addition to any skirmish and is very capable of diving thanks to the huge shield on his W and all the CC in his kit. If you're a player who enjoys getting stuck in and moving around the map, then Set is a really solid option. With his scalings from AD, he's also capable of doing insane damage with his W, dealing over 1000 true damage when he's deeper into his build. For AD carries in the god tier we have Ashe, Ziggs and Kog'Maw, and in the S tier we have Jhin, Misfortune, Sivir, Swain and Vayne. AD carry has seen very minor changes. Ziggs is the biggest with his mana nerf being reverted, but return his E now has less damage early for more damage later, and the slow is reduced early. The optimal skill order for Ziggs in a lot of scenarios was maxing W second, and with this change it may well force you into maxing E second again regardless of circumstances, but honestly this is something a big majority of players did regardless, so this shouldn't affect him too much. Xayah has benefited from the buff to her ult, but ultimately it didn't hit as hard as we initially expected, so she's returning to a position in B tier. Ashe has been massively rising in priority and win rate. She does really well in lane with her ability to shove and trade from a distance. Her E is a great tool to spot the enemy jungler to stay safe, and once she hits 6, she can get really strong all-in potential. Her ult is a solid tool when a team is needing engage, and she remains strong at pretty much every point of the game. The weakness she does have is a lack of mobility, so it's important that she has effective peel from a support when she's picked to give her space to start shredding targets. Ashe and Braum are a great example of a potent lane which helps shore up the counterpart's weakness. Braum lacks easy engage, which Ashe provides with their ultimate, and Ashe benefits massively from the insane peel Braum offers to keep her safe. On top of that, the CC they can put out can lock anyone down. Sivir is a really popular and strong anti-mage pick in the current meta. Champions like Draven are hard for it to deal with down to a short range, but she's actually a decent option into Ziggs as she can kill waves as quick as he can, and a spell shield heavily mitigates his poke, while her ult helps your team engage onto him. A lot of people have favoured the lethality Sivir build, and with buffs to a WAD ratio at higher ranks, she'll massacre waves and do a lot of damage in fights. However, Crate may actually have a bigger resurgence on the back of this buff, but either way she's a solid, reliable pick in the current meta. Jhin has been given some solid buffs to his W damage and ult at minimum AD ratio. These aren't massive changes, but Jhin has been a solid performer in low elo solo queue for a while now, and this definitely helps. Gale Force helps eliminate one of Jin's major inherent weaknesses, which is his lack of mobility. You can also combo it with your 4th shot to burst targets down, and use the movement speed you get from the crit to dip out again and reposition. Jhin is really strong at following up on engages with his W and ult, and has a lot of kill pressure in lane with his execute damage. Just be cautious about turnarounds if you don't finish them off before you have to reload. For supports in the God tier, we have Zyra, Blitzcrank, and Sona, and in the S tier we have Bran, Janna, Leona, Nami, Soraka, Xerath, Zillion, and Zyra. The major changes for support are Redemption getting a pretty significant buff. This won't affect a ton of champions specifically, but it's a better option to pick up for now, and I could see a lot of champions finishing it after their mythic. On top of that, we finally see Lulu nerfed, with the W and ult CD being increased. In the spots where she is good, she'll still be good, but there are more windows to punish her, and she won't be quite as oppressive as shutting down attempts to kill her AD carry. Sona got some major changes on this patch, and there's a lot to go over. Essentially, every time you hit a target with your Q, or heal an ally with your W, or you shield an ally and absorb some damage, you get a stack of your new passive. Each stack gives non-ultimate ability haste, and when you've hit 60 in total, new stacks instead reduce the current cooldown of your ultimate by 1.5 seconds. Essentially, the outcome of this is you'll be a lot stronger sooner in the game rather than waiting for level breakpoints. Once you've capped your passive, you'll have scenarios where you may even get 2 ultimates in a fight, which is insane. The flat reduction you used to get in your abilities from levels in your ultimate is gone, but in fairness, it was so powerful that you will be a bit weaker late game. But considering how rare it is for a support to hit level 16, you're not losing too much power. Sona has already been a really solid solo queue pick, and these changes just allow you to peak sooner in the game and put her in a really nice spot. A big beneficial change for Soraka is the redemption buff. It's a great item for topping your team up and yourself so you can keep exchanging your health to your allies. With the changes, you'll have it available more often and to great effect, and can help keep your team sustained through longer drawn out fights. Soraka is in a pretty solid position. She's a good laner, and if you consistently hit your Qs, the sustain makes it very hard to trade into you or even take you down. Your E is an amazing ability as a silence just shuts down so many champions, particularly a lot of the melee bruisers in the meta. On top of that, it's great to throw on top of your allies engaged to follow up, and this works really well with Ashe and Varus. Trundle has been rising quite a lot in popularity with Halo Blades as his rune. Essentially, Trundle's huge amount of damage from his bite combined with the attack speed allows him to trade heavily into a lot of melee supports and win out. This range matchup, your pillar is a great tool to stop them escaping, and as the game goes on, you can wilt tanks with your ultimate, chomp champions to drain their AD, and frustrate opponents with your pillar. The slow becomes really obnoxious with points in it and makes it very difficult to move through choke points for the opponents. You can also trap people against walls if you hit it just right, and it's a lot of fun to play around with. And that's it for this patch. Hopefully this has been helpful in getting you up to speed on the meta. If you're interested in seeing the full low elo and high elo lists in one place, including the C and D tiers, then head on over to mobalytics.gg where you can get even more info including counters, builds, tips, combos, and more. Everything's just been revamped, so be sure to check it out. See you next time, and thanks for watching.